Welcome to another episode of Orthodox Family Life. Today we have our dear friend Adam Lockridge. How you doing, Adam?
Oh, just fine. Thanks. How are you doing, Christina?
Thank God. Thank God. It's been a good summer. So today we're talking about teaching obedience to children and what I call the gift of obedience. I wanted to talk about this topic because we have a lot of parenting books that are written by non-Orthodox people, and they're always a mix of great ideas and terrible ideas. And it can be difficult for parents to sift through that, especially if you're fairly new to the church. You don't maybe necessarily understand the way we view children, the way we view obedience, and what we're actually trying to accomplish in the early years in particular. So I thought this would be a great place to start. And so let's start with the question of, why do you think we should teach obedience to children? Or maybe even, should we be teaching children to be obedient? Let's start there.
Why should we teach obedience? Well, I mean, I do think it's probably worth stopping to to actually kind of define what we're talking about. What is obedience? But maybe I'll just start with just a quick little anecdote. We're getting our school year started here at Mount Tabor School, and in the front, in the little entryway, we have a chalkboard that we try to put a little quote on to inspire the students as they walk in the door. And we were trying to think of a quote to put up on the board for the first day of school. And one of my teachers said from the back room, "Obedience is life." And that was his response. I don't know if that's a quote from a saint or if that was just his summary of, the distillation of the wisdom of our faith. But obedience is life, I think would be a pretty good answer. So
I think it's actually a book, if I'm not
yeah.
mistaken.
Oh,
It's
it is.
either,
Okay.
yeah, I think it's either a
I didn't
friend of
know that.
Katsunokiya,
Yeah.
or, yeah.
Hmm. Yeah.
So, so then we should be teaching obedience, or will it just naturally come along?
Oh, absolutely. It has to be trained. And, I was thinking about this, as we were preparing for our conversation. I think it really depends on the age level. And, in previous conversations, I think you've mentioned, before, or if we don't teach them before they're 5, to obey, it's probably too late. So it's certainly not only something that we need to teach, but it's something that we need to hasten to teach, before it's too late.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I'm pretty sure St. Porphyrios talks quite a bit about that, you know, by the time they're 5, 6, or 7, their character is set. And so we really do need to attend to those younger years, which is when most people actually neglect it, thinking, oh, they'll just pick it up later on. So, yeah, so let's just be really clear that the conversation we're going to have right now is really about younger kids. And
Mm,
then at the end, I'd like to speak directly about teenagers and kind of what that looks like, maybe. Okay.
sure. That
Okay.
sounds good.
So when I was thinking about this, obedience, of course, is a virtue for us. As you said, it's, obedience is life. And in the church, we have just obedience layered on top of obedience. You have the priest to the bishops, the people to the priest, within families, husband and wife to each other, and then the wife in a particular way being submissive and obedient to her husband, children to parents. There's just layers and layers of obedience. And so, why do you think the church says obedience is so important for us?
Mm. Yeah, that's I like the way you put that, because the layers and layers. And I think maybe the place to start would be at the top, and to say, well, ultimately our obedience is to Christ.
Mm.
And so and everything kind of flows down from that. So if we know that the goal of the Christian life is ultimately our fidelity to Christ, then and our job as parents is to raise our children up in that, then we would need to insist on their obedience, and it would be their responsibility to obey. But then I guess we could also ask the question, well, how do we learn that obedience ourselves? And as you mentioned, as a married man, I learned, my school of obedience is in the context of family and married
Hmm.
life, and even, uh, you know, in in uh, in my own way, I have to submit to my wife, and she submits to me, and so learning to do that is a big part of our own repentance. And then, of course, that family life has to happen in the context of our parish life, and having a priest and a confessor who we're confessing to, and then he's seeing the weaknesses where maybe we're wide of the mark, and we're having to and so our obedience to our and to our spiritual father is our connection to our life in the church. So.
Yeah, and I think too it's about humility, right? Because
Mhm.
by being obedient, we're learning to say, I don't know. I don't know what I need, right?
Yeah.
Or that my thoughts are not trustworthy, like that I actually shouldn't trust myself. I need to submit and to somebody, not just anybody, obviously, but to people that are in my life that have the grace to offer that spiritual guidance to me, whether that's your husband or wife or the priest.
Mhm.
So I think it's about humility, and there's just an utter lack of humility in our culture now, obviously. So I do think obedience can help us keep that front and center. We had an incident at one of the homeschool conferences where I think a parent was calling one of the little kids to come off the playground and to come do something. And the kid just kind of ignored their parents. And, he's a really sweet, rascally little kid. But there was an older kid there, and they actually stopped the game and said, no, so-and-so, do you hear your mom? Like, you need to go do that.
Oh, the kids did. The
The
kids did. Oh,
kid,
the
yeah,
kids
one
did.
of the older
Oh,
kids. And we
wow.
were like, we were kind of all cheering from the sidelines. Like, that's so
Yeah.
wonderful. Like, because that kid had an understanding that it's good for you to obey. Like, this isn't
Mhm.
about, crushing you or your spirit. Like, it's actually obedience in this context of love and is healthy for you, and it teaches you humility. And I would also probably say respect, which is also greatly lacking among people today. That even if you don't agree with the priest, like you should still be obedient. And that's hard to do because we all have our own. As adults, we're all very willful, and I know what to do. I know what's right. But that obedience is a way that we can cut off our own will and do the will of our Lord, through
Mhm.
others.
I think a really important part of that is remembering that, obedience is an internal phenomenon more than, an external, because it's maybe one thing to go through the motions ourselves, or but it's even if it's just making the choice to go through the motions, that
Mm-hmm.
okay, I'm gonna do this because I know it's good for me, and I trust that my heart will follow along, or or with our kids, speaking to their hearts and reminding them of that they can make a choice, and that they don't just have to kind of follow their instincts all the time. So.
Yeah, and I love that you mentioned the internal because I think some parents are looking for a solely external, right? Like I need you to behave so that I'm not embarrassed.
Hmm.
And really what we're talking about is what you said, the internal, like you're really concerned or should be concerned with what is going on with your child inside of them, right? What are their thoughts and their feelings? And it's almost like that gospel, right? There's a gospel about this. Somebody says, I think the Lord is saying, somebody says to, the son, go do this. And he says, I go, sir. And he doesn't do it. And the other one goes, I won't. It's a little defiant. And then he has a little time and he goes and does it. And who's really the one who's being obedient? And it's the second one. So sometimes, our gut reaction is to respond and to like demand something. But, if you're kind of patient and just think about it in terms of what's going on inside of the child, you know, they might turn around on their own.
Yeah. And, I was just thinking about, just to kind of even, to make things really simple. I was thinking about dog training, which that could be a good example and it could be a really bad example because, of course, I'm not suggesting that we treat our children like animals. But if you just think about the experience of, I don't know, going into someone's house and they have a really crazy dog,
Hmm.
and it's jumping up on you and it's barking, or maybe it's my dog and I have guests coming over, and how, I know that no one really wants a dog jumping up on them, or maybe a few people do, but most people don't really want a
Right.
dog jumping up on them, or, making a lot of noise, or, uh, you know, um, and but then contrast that with an image of a really well trained dog, which of course is very rare. I mean, many of us have pets, but few of us have very obedient dogs. But I'm always amazed when I see people who have, animals that they've trained to,
Hmm.
they just make a noise and they go this way and that, or they come, or they sit, or they wait, and there's just something so remarkable, and I would say even beautiful about
Hmm.
that. And I think when we think about the beauty of obedience, those are really the kinds of things that we're talking about. Uh, um, but um, but of course, with human beings and not with dogs, it goes well beyond that. But at least that's, I think, maybe a helpful place even to start the conversation, because y- you know um, our God is a God of order, and
Hmm.
we need look no further than out the window and look at creation to see the way that everything fits together in harmony according to God's law. And so, to me, that's really the kind of the spirit of obedience, is, bring not just, my children or my students or whoever it is doing what I want because that's
Hmm.
what I, but my job is kind of like the conductor of the symphony to bring things into an order, into a harmony, into a discipline, and we can't all be the conductor, you know.
Hmm.
And so maybe that's just another way of thinking about obedience.
Yeah, I've heard this before with the analogy with the training of the dogs, and yeah, agreed. Like we're not saying children are dogs, and
Yeah.
but there is some crossover. There's some similarities there, and
Mhm.
as you mentioned, you can have like two types of dogs when you walk into the house. You'll also notice that the trained dog is actually happier.
Mhm.
And I would say the same thing about children. Like children who are obedient are just happier, and that might
Mhm.
seem counterintuitive, but they've learned to control themselves. Like they're not carried away by every desire and thought and want that they have in the moment, and they're just much nicer to be around. And I think that's really important because I was talking to somebody else about this on a live stream, and there's a lot of people who are unfortunately regretting having children,
Mm.
or saying that they're child free by choice. And one of the many reasons they give is that they see people with children and the children are terrible. And it's like, yeah, and those children are actually very unhappy.
Mm.
Like your child needs you to be the person in charge, not in a
Yeah.
tyrannical way, but they need to know that you're the person who's in control of the situation.
Yeah.
And that, I think, breeds a lot of stability and happiness and
Mhm.
allows you to, a dog, again, going back to the dog, a dog that's well trained can go places and do fun
Mhm.
things and learn to, jump and do a course or something. But, if kids are not obedient and they can't function in society
Mhm.
in
Yeah.
this in the same way, right?
Yeah. I admit I have my suspicions about that when you say, people who don't want to have kids because they see children, behaving badly, and maybe they just feel hopeless, like, oh, it can never be done. But I do think that there's often a deep selfishness under there as well, which is the inconvenience of having
Mm-hmm.
of having children, and the demand that it places on the parent. And you look at any any parent who has children between the ages of, let's say, 0 and oh, I don't know, any, but
18, 20.
at least 20, yeah. And, we're all tired, and, we're kind of, you ask us how we're doing, and, the first thing out of our mouth is about our kids, or,
I've
it's
got
just,
gray
it's we
hair.
yeah, we probably don't always wear it very well, and so, I mean, there is a level at which, you know, um being a parent is an incredible sacrifice,
Hmm.
and but speaking of obedience, we can do that joyfully and with a spirit of willingness, or we can drag our feet and complain. And
Hmm.
I would imagine that most people who are thinking of having kids would be less inspired to have children if they saw, when they see parents like that, and probably it's a bit discouraging to our children too if they see us parenting with with a heavy heart, or you
Hmm.
know an unwilling spirit. So
Yeah, and these ladies online that are talking about being child free by choice or regretting their kids, the selfishness is not hidden. They're actually saying, "I am too selfish to do this," but they're
mm,
not saying that in an apology. It's actually like a declaration of self care in their eyes. Like, I know
mhm.
myself too well, and I don't want it. I want to
Yeah,
live for myself, which is
yeah,
incredibly sad. Um,
mm. Yeah, it's I mean, I think it kind of goes back to that decision at the beginning to have children, to get married, and and I think I remember the thought process going, okay, well, you know, I don't really want to give up my freedom and have a little child to take care of, but something tells me it would help me grow up. And I would say, looking back, that was absolutely the case, and that's maybe the sense in which, parents obey our children. You and, we joke like they're little
yeah,
tyrants, but you hear the baby crying and you're up and you're running, and it's like, man, you might as well be the king over there, calling at midnight to get up and go go feed the king or the queen her bottle or whatever it is, and so there there is a sense in which even um learning to obey means doing those things that we maybe would rather not be doing. So
yeah. I think of that as a prerequisite for teaching your kids obedience. Is that you're obedient to their needs, and like you said, if they're crying in the middle of the night, you need to go get them. Or if they, need some lunch or something and you're on Facebook or Twitter, you should get off your phone and go give your child what they need. They they have a right to that from you actually, I think. Like you don't get to say to your kids you have to be obedient to me, but I'm going to completely
mhm,
neglect all of
yeah,
your social, emotional, and sometimes physical
mhm,
needs. And
yeah,
this reminds me of, one of the things the Lord says about I think it's in the Sermon of the Mount where he's talking about ask and you shall receive. And he says something like, for who among you would give your son, if he asked for a fish, would give him a stone, right? And he's
mhm,
saying that the Father is our, the Heavenly Father is our Father, and it's his good pleasure to give us things. But I actually think we've come to a point where parents often give their kid a stone, that they
mm,
actually don't give the kid what they need.
yeah,
And that's such um, a basic thing that all parents do for like eons, that you love your children and you give them what they need, and yet we have a disconnect where
mm,
I think that there's a lack of love, really, that no, I want to do what I want to do. I want to be on YouTube
yeah,
or Facebook or
mhm,
whatever.
yeah,
It's disturbing to me to see that.
mm. So how do we teach our kids obedience? Because I think if we can agree, okay, this is what God is calling us to, and it's good. It makes for happy kids. It makes for joyful kids. It's good for us as parents to both teach obedience and to be obedient ourselves. what's the way that we train them up in this obedience that we're talking about?
Well, can I add one more prerequisite? Because I think
Mm,
it's important.
yeah.
Is that I think your children have to know that you love them. And so I
Oh,
think, giving them what they have a right to, your attention and food and all that. That's one part of it. But I think we talked about this before of the three ways that you can convey the love that you have, because we all love our children, but we're not all good at showing it.
mm-hmm.
And so I think it was the book How to Really Love Your Child. They laid out three different ways. And
Mm-hmm.
and I thought this was really incredible for those of us that maybe had a broken home, and maybe that was disrupted for you. Maybe you didn't feel loved by your parents, and now you have a child and you feel loved, but you don't know how to convey it, right? So
Mm-hmm.
the three things they say are eye contact, which you can think about if you get mad at somebody, you often just like don't want to look at them, right? You're looking away. Or if you're looking at your phone all day and you're talking to your kid, you know, while looking at your phone, you're not giving them that eye contact. The physical affection, always being very, loving physically to your child, hugs and tussling their hair. And I think we talked about this before.
Yeah.
And lastly, that focused attention where you put your phone down and you actually have a conversation with your kid, and not
Mm-hmm.
you telling them everything you want to say, but you actually listening to them and asking questions about their life, right? And this doesn't have to be like a big date somewhere, but just just carving out time for that to happen. Because if you're always busy, the
Mm-hmm.
kid can't come to you and open up about what they're going through, right? You
Mm-hmm.
have no idea what's going on inside of them if you don't do that. So I would say you
Mm-hmm.
have to not only love your children, but learn how to convey it well.
Yeah. Yeah. I do think that that physical affection one that you said is important. And I was just thinking about those kids at recess that you were talking about. About because I was just picturing, what do I do in this situation? When I'm a parent and I call to my kids and I say, Felix, come over here, and he doesn't come. Maybe he runs away, or he, and I think my response would be I would walk over there and I would grab him. But I wouldn't grab him in a like angry way, like get over here, you rascal. It would be almost like a big bear hug,
Mm-hmm.
and it would be a kind of all right, and he's small enough that I can do this. Of course, this doesn't work with an 11 or 12-year-old. Hopefully, by the time they're 11 or 12, they are the ones on the playground who are, their kids are
Mm-hmm.
going, better get over there,
Yeah.
but when you're dealing with like a young one, and sometimes, and this is a dad. I mean, maybe I know moms have maybe a bit of a different way, but I give a really deep kind of growl in my voice. And I say,
I totally
"Buddy,
do that.
you, and I kind of make my voice low, and I get really close to his face, and there would be nothing threatening about it,
Yeah.
other than just, I'm really big and you're small, and I love you, but this isn't going to happen,
Yeah.
And so, that's kind of has to be, I think, the spirit of any kind of discipline. Not that it always has to be fun and games, but it really shouldn't ever be a time where they're wondering, do my parents love me?
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah,
like,
absolutely.
if that's what's happening in your discipline situation, and I think the scary thing is that as parents, they might be wondering that, and we might not know it, you
Yeah.
know, and that's where that level of self-awareness and knowing what you're doing, and being in your own kind of walk of repentance is so critical. Because if that's not happening and you are just kind of reacting or parenting selfishly versus
Mm-hmm.
selfishly, then no amount of child rearing books or training or discipline or spanking or whatever it is, it's just going to make the situation worse. So I just that's a long-winded way of just 100% agreeing with you. Loving our kids is the foundation. It's the cornerstone of any kind of discipline. So,
Yeah, and there's so many good things you just said, but the on the very last idea is that I do want to caution people, like when you read a book, especially if you a parenting book, especially if you come from a broken background, you really have to weigh that against orthodoxy and reading what the saints say about child rearing, Saint Porphyrius, Saint Paisios, because each family is different, and it's like every book will give you some game plan, right? But every family is different. Every child in every family is different. So, every family has different baggage and different leanings toward different sins. Like, you can't just take what parenting books say and try to apply that very strictly. That's just a surefire way to mess up. You really have to know your children, love them actively, and know what they're struggling with, and just take all the books and things, including this podcast, as just you know advice to think about.
Mm. Just to add something to that, Christina, I recently had a teacher in service, and discipline of the students was the key topic. And one of the things that I brought up is that early on as a teacher, I thought, oh, teaching is going to be great. I'm going to study history, and I'm going to study literature, and it's going to be fun, and this is like what you imagine life as a teacher is like. And
They'll be so excited to hear all my
right,
wisdom.
right, right. And some years later, decades maybe, I realized I shared with my teachers. I said, a teacher is a student of children.
Hmm.
We're studying them, we're watching them attentively. It's like, what do you do when you love, when you really care about something or you love it? My daughter loves insects, and she pays attention to them. She's the first one to notice when there's a bug on the wall, and she's over there examining it and checking it out and identifying it. And as teachers, as parents, we should be students of our children. We should be patiently observing them and watching them and seeing how they respond. And that's one way of, well, not, I mean, that's I think the way to ensure that we have that self-awareness. I mentioned a few minutes ago that, if our children are not responding the way that we intend, well, we would notice, because we would be watching and paying
Exactly.
attention, and attending to what's going on with them, even if it's just a kind of observational mode. So,
Yeah, I just posted. We're recording the eve of Nativity of the Theotokos on the new calendar, and I just posted this wonderful homily by Metropolitan Augustinios of Florina. Attend to your children, and it's
mm,
just it's everything you just said. Just you have to take them for walks and listen to them and caress them. Like, you have to be, so much of parenting is just that, just actively loving and listening to your children, being connected and bound together. A child that's bound to you like that, like that knows that you love them, like they
mm-hmm,
want to please you. They're going to have their moments, but in general, like you, you just get a sense that there's communion between you, honestly.
mm-hmm,
And whenever that gets broken by something happened, and all of a sudden you can see a shift in the child, and you don't know what happened, but you can see that
mm-hmm,
something happened,
yeah,
right? And it's time,
mm-hmm,
that's when like you need to start praying and make that focus time to come, and hopefully they open up, or you try to figure out what's going on. But you have to
yeah.
start with being connected and being in communion with them in that way.
Mm-hmm. And this might raise something that I don't know if you want to get into or not, but you and I have talked about this famous parenting book, was it To Train Up a Child, I think is the
Ah,
name of it, and
yes.
it's pretty influential in a lot of circles. But and you had mentioned it in some of the notes as we were preparing for this, um, and and so I was just looking over it, and one of the things I saw in there is they talk about, those moments where you see that you've severed the ties with your kids,
Mm,
cut the cord. I think is the way that, and I think that's one way. That's one metaphor for talking about what you were just saying. We have that communion with our kids, and we are united with them in this bond of love, and it's not just sort of a sentimental thing. It's that we're
right.
connected to them, and we can. I mean, and if you're attuned to it, you can feel it when you've cut yourself off from them, or they've
Hmm.
cut themselves off from you. And when you sense that, that's that time to sort of, as you said, pray, and then in a way that you discern as wise and prudent, engage with them, and
Mm-hmm.
depending on the level. And I'm just thinking of a situation that happened, with my son yesterday, or 2 days ago. He's turning 14, and so he's kind of become a teenager. And I also have him as a student, which is interesting as a parent, having your child as a student. But he hadn't done his homework, and we had a little bit of a we exchanged a few words about it in the morning before school, and I could see that he had become downcast,
Mm-hmm.
which is, and um, I think there's even a reference to this in Genesis about their like or their the countenance had fallen, and you
Mm-hmm.
can just their countenance had fallen, and that's one way I think of saying communion has kind of been severed at that point. Maybe severed is too strong of a word, but some of the threads that were connecting you have just
Yeah.
kind of to to slip. And you know what they say: a stitch in time saves nine. It's time to get on that and patch that up, and
Yeah.
keep those accounts really short. And so so one of the things I tend to do as a dad is I let's come in here and let's figure out what's going on. How you doing? What's going on? What are you
Mm-hmm.
feeling right now? And my kids, I think, kind of get a little, maybe even a little tired of me asking that question. It's like, because I want to know, right? Lay it on me. Did I make you mad? Did I make you sad? Did I, tell me? And then once we can kind of get clear on what that is, that provides the you know a chance for me to clarify my expectations. It lets them feel like they have an audience to let me know that they feel sad or whatever's going on, give them a hug, and then we can kind of move on from that. But, that's with an older student. It may be way simpler with a 5-year-old. It might just
Mm-hmm.
be, you know, because, it might just be a hug or, something like that.
So, a question for that.
Mhm.
I have so many questions every
Yeah,
time
yeah,
you
yeah. Go
speak,
for it. Go
but
for it.
so two of them would be, do you always deal with it directly? Because I totally agree with everything you just
Mm.
said, but sometimes I would tend to maybe come alongside the child and like, hey, let's go
Mhm.
for a walk instead of
Mhm.
like, trying to take it head on. And my other question for you is, do you ever apologize?
Mm. Yeah. I think my wife and I probably have somewhat different styles with this. I'm probably a bit more direct about it, kind of a,
Mhm.
maybe rip the Band-Aid off sort of,
There's a place
approach
for
to
both,
dealing
to
with
be
conflict.
clear. Yeah.
And I think it goes back to watching how they respond to that.
Mm.
If I notice that, oh, I embarrass them or they're not ready and I'm trying to force it, that's where it would become selfish on my part. I
Mm.
really do need to give them a little bit of space or some time to kind of, you know,
You mean you
get,
can't say to
over
you can't say to your child, "I need you to get over this right now."
bingo. Yeah, that's it. Yeah. I need you to get over this right now. Yeah. Who's
Because
that
it's
about?
irritating me.
Yeah. It bothers me that you're not happy with me.
Yeah,
Yeah.
we're going to a party and I need you to look happy, okay?
Yeah. If that's the spirit in which you're sort of trying to immediately address it, then that again, that's probably more about the parent than it is
Hmm.
about the child. But or teen or whatever it might be,
Yeah.
because at that point they're not really children. But then you know but I would say err on the side of quickness from my perspective, because the potential discomfort of you know kind of getting into, dredging up the emotions or whatever, is the resentment and the bitterness setting in.
Hmm.
And that is the thing that's going to kill your relationship. It's like,
Yeah.
you get a cut on the playground. you know, you might need to give them a little chance to kind of like wipe their tears away and kind of take a few breaths, but like then put the band-aid on and and then move on.
Move on.
Take care of that wound now.
Yeah.
Don't wait a day, because a day later it's going to be infected and,
Hmm.
it's going to be hurting worse. And, you know, I mean, so
Yeah, I totally
mhm.
agree. So
You had two questions there. I
uh,
think I just answered one
do
of
you
them.
ever
Yeah.
apologize?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, that's a tough one. So, I mean, not tough in the sense that the short answer is yes,
Mm-hmm.
absolutely. I mean, but it has to happen in different ways, age appropriate ways, context appropriate ways.
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, I'll just say I'm a teacher, and so my mistakes are or sins even are sometimes even like a parent, you know, in front of a room of kids, and so I have to I have to kind of be discerning about how am I going to make that right if that
Mm-hmm.
does happen. You know, you can't, making a big deal out of it, can also sometimes just be about me. Oh, I feel so bad because
Yeah.
I showed my temper a little bit, or and then you know, I don't need to sort of make a big public apology to make myself feel better. But we don't want to let our pride get in the way too, because we also have to model exactly what we're expecting our kids to do, because ultimately this is the essence of the Christian life.
Mm-hmm.
you know asking forgiveness of one another. So um at our parish we have this kind of, I think, I'm not sure how it started. Maybe this is something they do in monasteries, and we have a tradition of a monastic presence in our parish. And so as we're preparing for communion, we do a kind of a smaller rite of forgiveness before each communion. And it's not like it's not like forgiveness vespers where we go around and ask forgiveness of everyone. But right there in the liturgy, I ask my wife's forgiveness, I ask my kids forgiveness, please forgive me. And they know what I'm asking forgiveness for. you know so I might have got a little sharp with you in the car on the way to church, or you know um I might have been a little impatient last night at dinner, or whatever it
Mm-hmm.
was. um but absolutely. So in that kind of, I love that because it provides a context where they expect it. So it's not going to catch them by surprise, or in a weird way, or in some kind of like, emotionally needy way. It was like, please forgive me, if from their dad, that would be kind of inappropriate, I would think. But in the context of liturgy, that's good. Or just maybe, normalizing it at home, before, or after evening prayers, just asking forgiveness of everyone, making it more of a just a expected thing, that is what we would always be doing of one another. So, um, I don't know. What do
Yeah.
you, what do you think of any of that?
Yeah. I agree with you that it shouldn't be emotional or about the parent,
Yeah.
like it, because you're right. Like we are trying to model it. Any behavior you want your child to do, you have to model, right? And we,
Mhm,
as Orthodox Christians, are supposed to be forgiving everybody.
mhm,
But there have been times, probably with older children, where just very
mhm.
simply I could say, "Forgive me, I lost my temper. I shouldn't have said
Yeah,
that." Just
for
that's all
sure.
it has to be.
Mhm,
Give them a hug. Whatever it is that they need to restore. What had been broken.
mhm,
So I think there's a place for it.
mhm.
Yeah, as long as it really is about restoring that full communion and not about your own ego or dragging it out. Kids are pretty ready to move on, I find, with most things. Like, deal
Mhm,
with it and move on. I think that's a
mhm.
good way to deal with it.
I think that vulnerability too teaches them vulnerability. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
if they can see, a grown man or a grown woman, just being vulnerable, oh, I messed up, I'm sorry. I'm sorry I yelled at you, forgive me. Then, and like you said, give them a hug, and it shows them that it's just natural and normal, first of all, to make mistakes, to sin.
Mm-hmm.
Not that it's normal in, I guess, a deeper sense, but, it's going to happen.
Right.
And then um, we don't have to beat ourselves up about it. We can just, yeah, open up about it, and then we can heal our relationships. And it can just, I think the beauty of doing it, as you said, kind of just quickly and naturally and normally, is that just becomes part of our lives. And um,
Yeah.
I think that's what it means to, yeah, what it means to be a Christian. So,
Yeah. So I also wanted to go back to something we talked about a little while ago.
yeah.
I think it was if we're feeling angry, not disciplining our children in that moment. And I actually want to bring up an example that This isn't about anybody I know because we've all
Mhm.
been there, but it's the mom that, during liturgy, we get upset and we grab our little kid and we kind of storm out, right? We've all seen this. I've definitely done it
Oh, yeah.
myself, right? So I'm not speaking to any of my friends, don't worry. But so what's going on there? Because I feel like there's a couple of different issues, right? There's the issue
Mhm.
of trying to discipline your children in public, which I don't think it's fair to ask your children to be better behaved in public than they are at home. Like
Mhm.
whatever they do at home, that's what they're going to do in public.
Yeah.
And the other issue is the anger, right? We all have anger.
Mm.
That's was something I definitely had to struggle with as a young mom of, you know, how to teach them to be obedient. And it was hard. And, because my own pride and my own sins are wrapped up in it. And it was really hard to disentangle that and just, figure out how to lead them in a way that wasn't about me and my pride and
Mhm.
what I wanted people to think my kids were like. So,
Yeah.
you want to tackle one of those?
Yeah. I mean, I don't know. Yeah. I mean, the challenge, of course, is just, I mean, as I think I mentioned last time we talked, I'm a convert to Orthodoxy. So we've been in the church, I think, 11 years now. And I just remember, the first time walking into an Orthodox church and how kind of foreign it felt, and how I felt like everyone was watching me, because it was like there's these expectations that I don't quite understand,
Mm-hmm.
and I'm not going to know if I mess it up. And so there is something about being, especially in liturgy, where those feelings I think lessen over time as you get comfortable, but there's also like a sense of reverence, and that should never go away. And then but then there's also the sense of like kind of social expectation, and that kind of thing that's mixed in with that. And so parenting in that environment creates a very high pressure environment. It's just, anything that would be just sort of slightly annoying at home becomes like explosively frustrating.
It's like the Olympics of parenting. It's
There you go. There you go. So what to do about that? I mean, what I, as a dad, again, I would just say, my expectation in my family for myself or for my wife, depending on the situation, is take the pressure off by immediately leaving the service, you know, and not in and this is like, to me, this is like the first step, in a process. The
hmm
process is pick them up as lovingly as you can,
hmm
just like the playground thing, scoop them up, don't yank them, and
yeah,
scoop them up. I love you, my child. Hold them close and walk out the door,
hmm
and that's also hard to do, because you might think of that as the walk of shame. I've
yeah.
I've just failed as a parent, but no, you have a job to do, and you're doing your job, and you know
That's really important to say. Like those of us who have older children, when we look at you doing that, we're not looking at you like, why can't you get your kids together? We're looking at you like, I remember
mhm,
those years. It's
yeah,
incredibly hard. Like,
mhm,
you know, let us know if you need help even. Like
mhm,
it's really
yeah,
hard when because you're probably not doing it once. You're probably doing
mhm,
it 5, 6, 7, 8 times in one
mhm,
service.
yeah, yeah.
So you probably feel more judged than you actually are, I think.
Mhm. Yeah. Oh, absolutely. And so that's the part that's fueling that feeling of anger
Mm-hmm.
is, because, psychologically what's happening is, you know, my child, you're embarrassing me in front of my
Yeah.
peers. It has to stop now.
Yeah.
you know, and that's the part I think you have to sort of, just let go and realize, you know, every parent goes through this, and priests have a nice way of kind of softening this and saying, it's holy noise, uh, but it definitely turns into unholy noise when it's happening repeatedly and over
Mm-hmm.
again, and the parents aren't addressing it. So um but so in my family, I would say scoop them up as lovingly as possible. And again, we've all made mistakes here and maybe been a
Mm-hmm.
little uh, scooped a little too aggressively or whatever. And then but then I think it doesn't end there. It really has to be, okay, you're out in the narthex, or maybe it's pretty noisy and you got to go all the way over to the fellowship hall if you have one, or maybe even out the
Mm-hmm.
front door. And by the way, that out the front door can be a really good one too, because you know it changes the dynamic where now you've got the breeze on your face, and you have the trees, and you have the sun, or whatever it is. And when kids are in that environment, it just kind of changes the dynamic of the situation. So even if you have to go outside, and the first step is to, if they're throwing a fit, or if they're angry, or if they're just being crazy, to kind of help them calm down. So,
Mm-hmm.
and I really draw a line there. I say, you know, we can talk, we can do whatever, but you have to be calm first, you know. And so, and until we can kind of get them, the energy ratcheted down. It's just, there's not really anything to talk about. It's just a
Oh
waiting
yeah.
game times at that point. And then once we've kind of got to that point, reminding them of the expectation, and there's probably going to be a consequence there too. And again, this all depends on kind of ages, because
Yeah.
you can't you're not reasoning with a 2-year-old. You're just
Exactly. Yeah. You're probably taking the 2-year-old out
yeah,
and hugging them and
yeah.
rocking them,
Mhm.
and
Yeah,
very different.
yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. Yeah, so I'm thinking probably 3, 4, 5 here, but yeah. So
Yeah. So, what do you think parents should be doing at home, or how do we train them at home so that when you go to liturgy, um, you're not asking them to do things that they weren't asked to do at home?
hmm yeah. Oh, that's a good one. Well, I mean, a lot of people probably aren't going to like what I'm going to say, because it's hard, because there's a lot of praying in Orthodoxy. We pray before we pray, and then we pray, and we pray after we pray.
It's
It's
true.
like, but in if liturgy or vespers or whatever it is the only time you're praying as a family, then I think that it's time to kind of take that next step. And I'm preaching to the choir here, because it's not like my house isn't like a little monastery, where it's like
Mm.
the services are just happening on some kind of regimented schedule. But we do pray as a family, and it's before meals, and it's before bedtime, and it's you know um y- you know uh, and so that's really the time to be doing that training, you know, and that's standing reverently, and getting them involved. That's where, like, that loving part of it comes in. Is it's fun to blow out the candle. I mean, you know,
That's exactly what I was thinking about when my family was really young. So, I guess I'm going to preface this with, how peaceful are your family prayers at your house? Because ours were not very peaceful, because,
Mm,
line them all up. We're trying to pray. And
yeah.
all they want to know is who gets to blow the candles out at the end. And so
hmm
it'd be amen, like this
right.
rush to be the first one. And it was, yeah, take a minute and just, okay, just calm down,
Yeah.
everybody. We're not,
hmm
it doesn't feel very prayerful, if I'm honest, right? Like, but
yes, yes.
so is that just our weird family, or is that,
Oh, no, yeah, I mean, that's it. It's, and, but I think the nice thing about that is it's not gonna be pretty, and it's gonna feel a lot more okay that it's not pretty than when it's happening in public. I mean,
yes.
that's kinda my point, um, is you can deal with it's easier to stop, have the conversation, maybe
Mm-hmm.
not in the middle of prayers if you can help it, but there's been times where, you know, I do, and I just gently pull them over, address the situation, you know, um, it might be the dog is causing a problem, and, like, get him in his box so that we're not distracted, or,
Mm-hmm.
but so sometimes you do have to stop in the middle of prayer, but you're not going to halt liturgy. That's going to keep, so
Mm-hmm.
you have more room to wiggle as a family. And that's what makes it, I think, a better venue for training. You could think of it
Mm-hmm.
like the scrimmage game, and the championship. You know, it's when you're playing the practice games that you want to make it as much like a game as you can, but you still are going to stop and coach, and you know um, and it's taking the seriousness down, I guess, just a notch to where training is a lot easier.
And
So
I think it's probably practice for the parents and patients as
mhm,
well in
yeah,
that moment of learning to,
mhm,
because it is messy and it feels unprayerful at times, you can still take that opportunity to learn to not get upset. Like it's okay. Like children
yeah,
need the guidance. They're not born just knowing how to stand for 4 hours for prayers. I mean,
mhm,
they have to be taught, and they have. Let's talk about expectations, like reasonable expectations,
yeah,
um,
yeah,
because some. I used to take. So I had 4 kids, 2 girls and the 2 boys, and the girls were able to stand for long periods of time. It didn't seem to bother them.
mhm,
I don't know where their minds are, but physically they could stand, right? And then
mhm,
had my first son, and he just had a much harder time in liturgy. And so I would always take him out for a break after the gospel, but he needed that longer than the girls. The girls maybe had until they were, 4.
mhm,
He needed
mhm.
it like until he was, 7 or 8 or 9. And so how do we kind of come up with reasonable expectations for our kids in general? We're kind of using liturgy as the example, but we're fleshing out the
Mhm.
details of how you do this using church as the example.
Yeah, yeah, that's a good question. At Mount Tabor School, we have a weekly children's liturgy, and it happens on Wednesdays, and the kids get to, it really is a liturgy that's kind of set aside partly for this kind of training, and the kids are singing in the choir, and they're helping to read the epistles and that kind of thing. Now, of course, not this is a probably kind of a luxury, for us in comparison to probably what a lot of parishes have, and I recognize that. But thinking of that as here's what's possible, even just kind of, I'm just thinking of the boys in particular. You know, boys love nothing more than for someone to give them a job, you
Mm-hmm.
know? And so I mean, I'm just thinking of, as a dad, it's like, hold this flashlight for me. And it's like, a boy who was just like out of control 5 minutes ago is like dutifully holding the flashlight,
Mm-hmm.
just perfectly, and so think about that same principle in liturgy. I mean, a lot of it, when possible, having boys serve as altar servers, I think is a really great thing, because, the kid who is not paying attention in liturgy and kind of all over the place, he's holding the candle as if his life depended on it. It's
Mm-hmm.
just something about having a role. But even if you don't have that role, as a dad, I might have a, again, depending on the age of my sons. um, with my younger sons, let's say 3, 4, 5, I'm more involved, I think, as a dad when I can. And I know, if maybe a dad is a priest or something, and you might not be able to do this, but for the most part, um, it's stand in front of me, and my hands might be on his shoulders, and it might also be kind of getting down close to them and pointing, and
Mm-hmm.
my attention is guiding their attention. So there's those kinds of things, and then, as they get older, it's talk about, okay, you know, how are we standing, and posture, and don't put your hands in your pockets, and you know, uh, and thinking, and maybe even showing them a picture of a soldier who's guarding a palace, and just getting it, that idea of being a soldier for Christ, I think is pretty powerful, especially for our young men. And so thinking of standing in services as kind of, you're keeping vigil, you're holding down the fort, for your king. And if you can kind of get them in that mindset, they can stand there for a while,
Mm-hmm.
and if they get tired, if they can't, having that kind of mercy to be able to say, take a break,
Mm-hmm.
at the right time, not at the great entrance, or
Right.
but, sit down for a minute, or giving them a little space to sort of not, or letting them go get a drink of water, or
Mm-hmm.
whatever they do during the service. So yeah.
Yeah, I love that. What you're really explaining is that we can't just demand our kids act
Hmm.
correctly. Like we have to show it, we have to model it, we have to explain it, we encourage it. help it along, right? It's kind of like you don't just drop a seed in the ground and walk away, right? You have to tend to it. It's an active thing, right?
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes kids are doing the wrong thing, but they're not being disobedient. So
Mm-hmm.
I think what you're talking about is making sure they know what the right thing to do is, how to behave in church, right? You shouldn't be yelling at your kid. Well, you shouldn't be yelling at your kid anyway, but you shouldn't call your kid out for incorrect behavior at church if you've never told them what the correct behavior is,
Mm-hmm.
right? That's not disobedience.
Right.
That's
Right.
ignorance.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. And one of the prayer books, I think it's the little Antiochian red one. There's that little list of the works of mercy, and one of them is instructing the ignorant.
Mm,
And as parents, one of our works of mercy is instructing them when they don't know,
mm-hmm,
and so approaching that with gentleness and kind of a soft touch, and um, this has been on my mind recently. I've never done martial arts before, but I started recently, and for a couple of different reasons. But I've been really impressed by how a martial arts instructor is kind of, they're not kind of always the drill sergeant.
mm-hmm,
They have this kind of gentle way of correcting. So
mm-hmm,
sometimes they'll say, well, some people do it this way, but really you kind of do it this way, and just kind of being roundabout sometimes in your explanations, and remembering that it takes time to learn. It's hard to remember which direction to make the sign of the cross
yeah,
sometimes. You're not dinging them for making it the wrong direction, but you say, okay, let's try one more time. Start over here and then over
mm-hmm,
here, and it's just those things. And I think that's where, for us as parents, it's always like it's a test of our patience as much as it is a test for them. Is how many times is too many times to help you remember, and how many different ways do I have to explain it to you, but as many times as it takes. And I'm not going to give
mm-hmm.
up on you, but I'm certainly not going to start you know lecturing you or scolding you because you forgot. It's,
Yeah, it's great that you're learning something as an adult because I think that can remind us what it's like for them.
mm,
A lot of this is new for them and they don't know, and it takes time, and you know just telling them once. I mean, they're kids. They don't always remember once. That's normal for kids, right?
yeah.
Um,
No, that's exactly it. I think I had forgotten maybe what it was like to be a
mhm.
student, and that reminder has been, and student or a child, in that position of someone kind of giving me really direct instructions. It's humbling, in a
Yeah,
good way.
I think Andrew Pudwa says that every few years he tries to learn a new alphabet from a different
Mm,
language to
mhm,
remember how hard it is to remember stroke order and sizing. And, as I was learning Greek a few years ago, I
mhm.
totally had this experience where it looks very easy. And all of a sudden, like my deltas are, not what they should be looking like. It's like, oh, this is what
Yes.
little kids are struggling with. And they don't
Mhm,
have that muscle memory. But I think it's the same with behaviors, there's a lot of teaching that needs to go on. So for actual, kind of the teaching of obedience, we have to save these things for things that are actual things that they know and they're choosing
mhm.
to not do maybe.
Yeah.
So we haven't actually talked much about the how. So let's start there. We said start young, right? There should be
Mhm,
some expectations, even with very young children. But one of mine is like disobedience. And again, I'm talking here pretty young children.
mhm.
Like disobedience isn't an option. Like if I ask you to do something, it's gonna get done, you know.
Yeah.
Because I feel like if you let your child be disobedient,
Mhm,
you've actually trained them to be disobedient,
mhm.
and it's going to take several times of being obedient to kind of get rid of that.
Yeah. No, that's true. Although I would add that that requires that requires choosing what hills you're going to die on, so to speak.
Yeah.
Choosing your battles, because you can't have a zero tolerance policy for everything. you
Right.
know. But so one of my big things, both as a as a head of a school and as a dad, is like we're going to have rules that are not too so numerous that we can't, we can't remember them and enforce them. The rules have to be simple, and they have to be enforceable, and they have to be
Yeah.
enforced. And I think that that's kind of what you're getting at is if you have rules that aren't enforced, you are robbing yourself and your family of authority, a sense of authority and respect. And that's a big problem. Don't make rules you're not gonna stand up for.
Or can't,
Or
you're
can't.
going to, you,
It's
you'll,
impossible to enforce.
yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I think we already covered training them at home, not in public. I would also add never ask for things that are unfair. And we've already
Mm-hmm.
talked about above the child's ability or without the proper training. So you can't expect them to do something they don't know how to do. But also the idea of something that's unfair. I think one example might be maybe sharing, honestly. Like there's like a certain autonomy there. Like this is their thing. Should you
Mm-hmm.
really force a kid to share with another kid? I don't know
Mm-hmm.
about that. I don't know. What are your thoughts?
Compelling them to share. I do think that that is an example of a type of behavior. I mean, it really just kind of depends on the context. So, I'll just like here at school, we just got a new swing set, and there's two swings. So it's not a majestic swing set, it's just a swing. But it's something new. And so of course the
Sure.
kids are it's first week of school, everybody's really excited about it. And so, well, first we just encourage the students, just
Mm-hmm.
take turns, you know and then you watch, you observe, you monitor the situation. And then if it becomes a problem, then you can kind of see the kids that become a problem, and then you pull them aside and you say, are you sure you're sharing? Because I'm not sure you are. But I think you see where I'm going with this. Like taking this pastoral approach
Mm-hmm.
where school is still sharing, but if you have to start making rules like, okay, everybody gets 5 minutes,
Yeah.
that that's where it starts to become micromanagey. And I think maybe that's kind of what you're getting at is, you know, compelling them to sort of conform to some sort of like arbitrary decision, just reinforces actually an irresponsibility. You know,
Mm.
it would actually teach the students, well, we don't really have to pay attention to one another. We just have to follow the rules. And then you get into this like legalistic thing where it's like, I have 10 more seconds left,
Yeah. Yeah.
and
The
so
whole idea of fairness is a big topic, I think. But I was actually thinking of a different example because the swing doesn't belong to the child. Actually, it's not their
oh yeah.
swing. So I'm talking
Mhm.
like their stuffed animal, something that is theirs. Like, would
Oh,
you maybe make them
yeah.
share that? Because I think we
No.
do that sometimes. We expect them to,
Mhm.
maybe share things that are important to them, and I
Yeah,
think that crosses a line maybe into,
you're right. That's a different example. And so with those types of situations, whenever there's a conflict, as a habit of thinking as a parent, I always try to, and maybe this is kind of trying to be fair, to be a just judge. If there's a conflict, everyone is wrong. You know, there's no
mm,
one who's I'm not going to pronounce justice upon a situation with my kids where someone is the winner and someone is the loser, or
yeah.
someone is the righteous victim and someone is the bullying aggressor. Like that's never going to happen. So, you took my stuffed animal is a tough one because in a way, there is kind of a bully and there
Mm,
is a victim. It's like you took my stuffed animal. I mean, it's pretty hard to find like, the but so in that situation, uh it really is just I might pull the child who aside who took it and try to persuade them to give it back versus taking it away and handing it back.
mm-hmm.
And then the thing that the child who has been victimized in this situation would be the hard thing for them then is going to be forgiving, or kind of moving on past it and not
Mm-hmm.
harboring bitterness. And so coaching them on being not just like, ripping it back out of their arms and stomping off to their room, but really kind of receiving the repentance of the other one. So no,
Hmm.
I would never like force a child to share something, but if they were having a hard time sharing, then that's a different, so I guess
Yeah.
it's similar to the swing set in that I'm watching you, and if I see that you're not wanting to share in a kind of, selfish way, then I can't force them, but I might, similar to the child that stole the stuffed animal, I might say, I bet he'd really like to play with that. You know,
Hmm.
in fact, what if you just went over there and just said, would you like to play with this for a little bit? What would happen? And I bet that'd make him really happy, and then just
Hmm.
kind of through that. So I don't think there's a difference between coercion and persuasion in all these situations, I guess, is what and I think as leaders of our families and of our children, we really have to help them see the good in what they're doing and not just sort of, kind of ding them when they, breach conduct or something like
Yeah.
that.
Yeah. It's a very dynamic situation. And, it can be kind of exhausting sometimes, like just hashing all this out with kids, right?
Yeah, yeah.
We had one little funny story where my two of my kids were arguing, and we talked about it for way too long. They were pretty young, and we got to the end, and everybody was happy, and all of a sudden one of them burst into tears. And I'm like, well, what's wrong now? We just wasted all this time talking about it. That was a
Yeah,
lesson for me. Okay, we need to keep this, as you said before, short, and
yeah.
just do our best to
Hmm.
work through it quickly. So do you do counting? Do you like count down? Okay, like, okay, Roger, I said do this. You're not doing it. I'm going to count to three.
Oh,
1, 2. I mean it, Roger.
uh-uh. No, 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 no. No counting. Yeah, I mean, I'm trying to, because anytime the way I'm feeling myself reacting, I'm thinking no, 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 no. But I'm going, okay. Is there a situation where that might be appropriate? I mean, I guess there might be one where giving them a chance to correct. But I think no. I mean, it really obedience has to be pretty automatic.
Hmm.
Instantaneous there, because if you're counting, you're kind of it seems to me you're kind of giving them uh, a window of kind of hesitation that you don't
Yeah, you're not
necessarily want to
serious.
do
You
that.
didn't
Yeah.
mean it.
Hmm.
You said something that you didn't actually mean to enforce.
Hmm.
That's how
Yeah.
I feel about it. Like,
Yeah.
because
I
okay,
think that's.
I really will get angry in a moment. In a moment, I'm gonna, you know, yeah,
Mm-hmm.
I don't think that's a good thing. So if you're not gonna ask them to do something, don't ask them. But if you ask them to, I think you have to
Yeah.
deal with it pretty quickly.
This may have been something even to kind of share, because I think sometimes I just want to make sure, for those who are listening into this conversation we're having. I mean, I have, like, I have kids at a lot of different ages, so ours are pretty spread out. I have 5 and 8 and 14 and 16. And so, and sometimes I kind of jump back and forth between age ranges, but I have kind of maybe a little breakdown, if you don't mind me sharing it,
Sure,
just about
absolutely.
how I would think about like the different phases of teaching obedience. And I would say, from the cradle to about 5 years old, I would just think of that as what I would call behavior training. It's,
Hmm.
and I mean, the simplest example, of course, is like potty training, but it's, can you, they stay in one place, without, or can you, observe just like physical boundaries, or things like biting, or, all these little things,
Hmm.
almost, like the puppy example that we were
Yeah.
talking about earlier. But like from 0 to 5, I think a lot of it is just that, really, like that kind of behavior training. From 5 to 10, I would consider this like manners, the
Hmm.
manners zone. And at our school, we actually have we use these little cards. I went and grabbed them because I thought I might mention them, but this they're manners of the week. You see the first one is smile, and there's a little explanation on the back of it, which is: smiling is the easiest and best way to show kindness. It demonstrates that you notice people and want to make them feel comfortable. So there's just a, you know,
Mm-hmm.
and these are the kinds of things that we need to really, explain to kids at that age, 5 to 10. You're probably not going to give a classroom demonstration of smiling when they're, when they're teenagers like that.
Right.
Want them to
Absolutely.
really despise you, then give them a smiling demonstration. But earlier they'll receive that.
Mm-hmm.
And it could be table manners, but things you wouldn't really think of as manners, like just consider your words before you speak, look people in the eyes, those types of things. So, to me, that's what obedience training looks like, kind of
Mm-hmm.
between the ages of say 5 and 10. And then from 10 to 15, and again, these are really rough ages. I mean, kids mature at different rates and that kind of thing. But I'm just thinking of my kids and kind of these different zones of training. This is when they're really the difference between, I would say, like a 10 or 11-year-old and an 8-year-old is when they help you, it can actually be very helpful,
Yeah.
versus you're helping me, but I'm actually helping you learn, versus no, you're actually helping me. And so 10 to 15, I would say, is the time to really lean into that and go, okay, you're going to come help me. And I'm actually depending on you now,
Mm-hmm.
if you're not sweeping the floor isn't swept, and that's gross.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Or the dishes aren't done, and then we're not going to have clean dishes tomorrow. So that's when, in 10 to 15 is when they're learning, I say, responsibility and capability. So you know how to wash the dishes, and you know that it's your job, and you're going to do your job and not require someone else to do it. So to me, that's kind of the 10 to 15. And then, with our older teens, so like, 15 to 18, until, or, maybe graduation, but of course it takes some kids longer, is productivity and leadership. So that's where they're learning, okay, it's not just responsibility, it's actually I'm making a contribution that requires some kind of creative effort on my part, that I have something to offer and that only I can offer to my family,
Mm-hmm.
church, ultimately to our creator. And he's made me in a certain way. And so it's kind of, there's a vocational discernment aspect of that. And then it's also the point where they really start to like grapple with the fact that the younger ones are watching. I mean, we
Mm-hmm.
always know that, but by the time you're 15 or 16 or 17, you can actually see your younger siblings misbehaving as a result of watching you misbehave, or vice versa, or they're watching you and they're going, oh, I, they're, you know, they're behaving this way, I'm going to do that too. And so to me, those are kind of like the phases of obedience training. But ultimately, it's, it culminates in independence and freedom. They
Yeah.
become their own individuals who are, um, you know, I love thy law, O Lord, and they can say that, in sincerity and purity of heart. So,
I love that, Adam. That takes so many things that I've thought of individually and puts it into a really beautiful system. So I hope you write that out and share it with us, maybe, because that's just 1,000% agree.
oh,
And
thank God.
and I think that people need to understand that while we like, I personally require a lot of obedience when they're younger, but
Mhm.
as they grow, it's really turning into respect. And you're
Mhm.
not, we're not trying to nitpick the kids. We're not trying to tell them what they need to do with their life. Like you said, by the time they're 16, 17, 18, they're, they have that self command. And I like what you said about them looking at the younger kids, because that on the playground incident with the conference, it was actually an older kid about that age who was able to look at the younger kid and say, no, you need to go listen to your mom. And I think they begin to see the wisdom. They begin to
Mhm.
see, like, oh, that's why we have to be obedient when we're young, and always, but because it makes this whole thing work. Like, yeah, of course you do. Instead of, getting 18-year-olds who are just angry with the parents, right? Where
Mhm.
the communication and the love and everything has broken down, something has gone wrong, right? But ideally, you want your teenager, your older teenager, to kind of understand the system and that everything was done out of love, and that they, like, you're proud of them and they are their own person now, and they have the talent and the ability to go be who they are, and that you're their
Mhm.
cheerleader. You're not, nitpicking on everything or trying to control their lives. Like they're actually, you're slowly giving that control over, I guess is what I'm trying to say.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. With our older teens, recently we've been talking about like planning, and so I've spent about 15 minutes in the morning before school just talking about how to use a planner,
Mm,
and I don't know that most people would connect that with like, this is like their expression of obedience, but I guess the connection is that, when you're young, your parents are really like, they're saying where and when to be, and this is your goal versus,
hmm
what is my goal, and having them kind of start to take ownership and responsibility for those processes is and is, I think, a critical part of sort of sending them off into the world. So it's like kind of like it's the icing on the obedience cake, so to speak. So
Yeah, and it's the goal, right? You start with like um, I'm gonna kind of force isn't the right word, but implement a framework of for your life to help you figure out like what your life should look like. But slowly
hmm
that framework is taken away from the parents, and it's the child is
hmm
able to do that on their own, and it gives them
yeah.
like the kids I know that have done this, they're really happy. They have a ton of gifts and talents that they've developed, right? They're not, forgive me, they're not just sitting in the basement playing video games all day. Like they have drive, they know who
hmm
they are. I think teaching obedience well in the context that we're talking about helps them to mature into a real adult. Like in the old
yeah.
days, this was standard for everybody 40 years ago,
hmm
right?
yeah. Yeah, you would no more, plan the schedule of a 15-year or 16-year-old than you would, clean the whole room of a 7 or 8-year-old. It's like,
Mm-hmm.
no, yeah, I'll stand here and I'll help you. Here's where to put everything, but you know. You're not going to send, my 7-year-old is not going to watch me clean her room. I mean, that would
Right.
just be weird. But of course, they don't want, I mean, in a way, none of us want to take responsibility for our own time and our schedules and all of that, but passing that
Mm-hmm.
responsibility off to them is such a critical piece.
And that's why it has to be incremental. That's why you start young, and
Yeah.
you're laying that foundation of basic skills and character, and so that when they are, I have a 16-year-old, and he has a
Mhm.
planner. He has the
Mhm.
Orthodox ethos planner, which is very nice, I
Yeah.
must say.
Yeah.
A little bit of a splurge for us, but I just sit down with him, every morning. So what are you doing today? Tell me. Like I don't
Mhm.
tell you what to do every day. I
Yeah.
need you to tell me what's your plan. Are you going to work? Do you have this class or that class?
Mhm.
Um, so it's checking in, but really,
Mhm. And you can always say, "And if you don't have a plan, I can give you one,"
oh
you know?
yeah,
And, that's usually enough motivation for them to be like, "Oh, yeah, 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 I'll make a plan."
yeah, I've done that. Well, lastly, I just want to say, everything has to always be done in prayer. And I was hoping to read some quotes from St. Porphyrios, but we didn't have time for that. But I'm going to read them separately and post them separately because I think, we're just two people on the internet, but you always have to go back to the saints and to the wisdom of the church to really
Mhm,
balance out anything that maybe didn't come across the way it should have for you, and in your own particular situation. So, but St. Porphyrios, he's just really famous for saying, whatever you want to say to your child, say to the Panagia first, say to the Mother of God, say to the Lord,
mhm,
and they
mhm,
will help the child to listen and to hear. And I just keep going back to that. You have to do that because this is really hard. And there's, especially
mhm,
if you don't have a good background, you don't have a good family life that you came from. This can be overwhelming for people, especially when you have multiple children and you're trying to homeschool. And I'll just share one personal story from my early years. I think my oldest two were maybe second grade and kindergarten. I had a toddler and a baby, so very full. Um, hadn't figured out all the obedience and stuff yet. Things felt very chaotic, and I just remember being so frustrated, and that frustration would turn to anger sometimes. Like, It's 8:30 in the morning and everybody is crying. Like, what are we doing? Clearly something's not working. And I remember being so overwhelmed by it that I actually just kind of laid on the couch, closed my eyes because everyone around me is crying. Like, this is an active crying situation. And I remember just calling out to God, like, I can't do this. Like, this is so overwhelming. This is so, I just don't have it in me. Like, how am I supposed to do this?
Mm.
And, just please take this anger from me. Like, I meant, like, over time, I thought, it would go. But in that moment, and this is the only time it's happened, all the anger just left. And I was really shocked. I was like, oh, like he actually took it away. Like,
Oh,
and
yeah.
the next day I had to come
Mm.
back and deal with it. But in that moment, I felt like God was just giving me that little bit of, it's going to be okay. Like, you just
Mm.
have to get up and keep trying. So,
Mm.
it's hard. You don't have to be perfect with any of this stuff. You're learning along with your children. They're learning how to be obedient and you're learning how to be a parent. And you just need to keep praying.
Yeah, yeah. And I would imagine there's probably someone out there listening who might be in that situation that you were describing. And, just thinking about that, my heart goes out to those parents who are,
Mm-hmm.
kind of at their wits' end and feeling kind of trapped by the whole situation. Having children can feel, well, car rides are a great, like, visual image because it's like I'm trapped in this very confined space with, like, you know, very challenging people. And, but you're right. It's really hard to say, but it's like this too is for your salvation,
Mm-hmm.
you know. And I mean, well, I guess I should say it's easy to say. It's hard to grapple with that in those moments, but it's true. And God is there, and He's waiting for us to call out to Him and ask for that strength, and to make it through this day, not tomorrow, but
Yeah.
just
This
today,
moment.
this moment,
This moment right now.
to
Yeah.
get to the next parking lot or whatever. Yeah.
Yeah. And I'm just, encourage everybody because if you put the time in, like, eventually you're going to start reaping those benefits. And it's such a joy to be around my children now. Like, we all love
Mm,
each other. We have fun together. Like, it's not always going to be like those early years where it's really intense. But if you can just keep cultivating that love and communion between the family, then
mhm.
like it's so good. Like, it's so much better than you think it can be. And I think that's why the Lord says children are a blessing. Like, sometimes we think that's a little bit abstract, but it's like, no, like it's a real blessing to like have these little people who like just love you so much, like
Yeah,
they know, and they know you. They know all your faults and they know all your weaknesses and your worst moments, and they still love you. Like,
man.
we all need
That's
people like that.
that's such a good word. I mean, and of course, it's the rebuke to those
Hmm.
out there who are saying, children are not worth it,
Hmm.
because it's absolutely the other way around. I mean, it is the greatest blessing, and they really are the greatest treasure, and a
Hmm.
gift from God. And unlike a little dog, that we're training, it's these are men and women made in the image of God who will comfort us in our old age, and and be there for us as we were there for them. And so it's the way that it ought to be, but
Hmm.
God help us to live as we ought. So,
Yeah,
yeah.
it's a great way to end. Well, thanks, Adam. I took a lot of your time today, but
I
always enjoy
always
our.
enjoy it, Christina. Yeah, wonderful chance to speak with you, and I hope it was a blessing to your audience, and um, yeah, may it be blessed.
May it be blessed. All right, so just hang on for us, and thanks everyone for listening.